How will we address the climate crisis? Climate One with Greg Dalton brings together advocates, influencers, and policymakers in empowering conversations that connect all aspects of the climate emergency, the individual and the systemic, the scary and the exciting, to help you understand the most critical issue of our time. Because addressing the climate crisis begins by talking about it.
Most Americans support climate action, but you wouldn't know it from Congress or the courts, or from most of the media. People on both the left and the right experience the same devastating floods, the same life-threatening heat waves, and the same catastrophic wildfires. Yet individuals tend to operate in completely different information bubbles and see problems and solutions through different lenses. Joan Blades, co-founder of livingroomconversations.org, and before that MoveOn.org, and John Gable, co-founder of allsides.com, have been working to burst those bubbles and bridge the divides. How can the rest of us learn to rebuild respectful civil discourse? Today on Climate One. Joan, you mentioned that 2008-10 was things started to change. What do you see as the story of climate the last 10 or 12 years? What's the narrative? If you think back to that time, 2008, Obama and McCain ran basically in the same place on climate change. 2010, things, the midterms, Tea Party, things really changed. How do you see the story?
Well, politically, the story of climate was it became one of the polarization points, which is kind of a tragedy. When, in fact, what I've seen over the last 10 years is the opportunities have totally changed. The cost of clean energy is less than the cost of oil. We can do clean energy so much more effectively. It's good for the local community, good for the global community. And, it was sort of like that conversation I had with Mark and his friends. We were really surprised by how much we agree. And at this point, I think our division is causing us to not see how much we agree. There are huge opportunities, and we are just not grabbing them because we're so caught in this fight.
And John, this is painful for you because you think that there's more agreement on climate than a lot of other things.
So much more agreement on climate than most issues. A large majority of Republicans do believe in climate change, do believe its impact that's man-made, do believe it's impacting our lives. Huge majority agree with some of the specific solutions, like planting 1 trillion trees, or actually using tax credits and other types of financial measures to encourage better behavior. There is a lot of agreement there. And I think that's actually what we need to focus on. The political class who get elected by saying we're better than those guys do not emphasize common ground. Common ground's boring for press. It's not good clickbait. And actually, if you're trying to raise money as an environmental group, saying, hey, we agree with the other side isn't necessarily the best way to raise money. Telling your contributors that the other side is evil and they're terrible and awful, that's the easier way to raise money. And so there's a lot of opportunities here to actually work together and focus on the planet. I think all of us who really believe in this issue, or any issue, if you will, we have to decide what's more important to us, being right about that issue, or actually the impact, solving the problem. So if you hear me or somebody you're talking with saying, hey, I agree, let's plant 1 trillion trees, let's do financial incentives to have cleaner air. And I also say, I don't think the climate is as big of an issue as you do. I think there are other issues that are more important to me. So if you stop and listen to that and think about how we might respond to that person. If your tendency is to respond by saying, oh, the climate is really bad, you're not paying attention to these things, and that thing about the UN saying that some of these scenarios aren't likely to happen, that's one approach. The other approach is, do you want to plant 1 trillion trees? Do you want to do financial incentives? Let me help you do that. Let me introduce you to groups that want to do that. I will help you do that. the first response of saying what they're wrong about is really about me or us being right. And my gosh, we love being right. All of us do. We're human beings. We like being right. But does that really save the planet? If it's more important to you to solve the problem, to address climate change, I recommend the other approach, finding the common ground, seeing where you agree, and working together to make it real.
And a variation of that I've heard is, you want to be right or you want to be in relationship. And many
That's good.
people, that's like, ooh, the relationship, right? So Joan, how does that, when you're talking with people who have different views than you, is there a little voice in you that wants to like spring facts or counter them? Or do you think, oh, this is my friend, I'm going to be quiet and listen and, bite my lip?
Well, I'm not biting my lip these days. I mean, what's been really great about this is making friends like John, who I am curious, why are we seeing things? John's brilliant. John is someone I really trust at a deep level. And when we disagree, it causes me to look at what I'm thinking, what I believe, and where are the holes in it? Why do we see things differently? This stuff is confusing. I mean, it's not that it makes life simpler. It's really easy when you got black and white, but we don't. And there's actually a lot of colors in this whole system too.
And you say that there's, research shows that people make gut judgments about people and our brains follow. So what does that mean? And that's contrary to often people say, oh, it's not rational. We got to be rational. We got to be optimal.
Yeah, people keep on thinking we're rational beings. And it's a nice fiction, but over 90% of the time, if you look at the science, over 90% of the time, we're doing it by gut. And then our reason follows. We rationalize why we made the right decision. And that's human. So, with my dear friend in Utah, when we started becoming friends, climate wasn't on his list of concerns. And it got on his list of concerns, not because I'm a brilliant presenter on climate, but because he cares about me.
Wow, he cares about the climate because he cares about you and you care about climate.
Yes, and another friend of his, he has two people that he feels close to, and we really care. And I care about him being concerned about being, put in a position of being isolated and othered, Mm-hmm. We care about the people we love and what they care about, and that's good. So whereas talking about climate change is really important, talking and having relationships across differences is critical also. And we need to do it en masse, not just, we have people that we've cut ourselves off from.
And it just seems, John, that so many conversations when people care about something, they try to persuade in one conversation, over one beer or one meal. And so how do you approach, is persuasion and persuasive, or are there other ways to connect with people?
Well, Joan has completely convinced me and brought me on board with the relationships first piece. And when she and I first met, friends of us introduced us, and we were walking around on a walk in Reston, Virginia, on some parking lot. And I always say that if Joan Blades asks you to go on a walk, go on that walk, because it was transformative for me at least. And when we found that we were
Did you trust her? She's this founder of this liberal moveon.org thing. Did you trust her?
I never lived in a place where most people agree with me, so I'm not, that doesn't bother me. I'm a Republican in San Francisco who worked for Mitch McConnell, so I'm really popular here. So that's not unusual for me. And I'm actually, I love discovering people. I love finding that kind of brightness in them. It's just something I've learned being from Kentucky and also being in both poor areas and then very wealthy, affluent areas, and going back and forth to like Bar Harbor, Maine, and coal mining, Kentucky. I learned at an early age how people can other others, whether it's people without wealth othering those people with fortune or vice versa. And you begin to get a good sense of real character and not being caught up in the kind of covering of the book or the stereotypes. And so it was very obvious to me what anybody who meets Joan, it's not hard at all to recognize the sincerity and intelligence and just solid person she is. And we discovered that we were working on the same thing. I came from the technology side. 25 years ago, when I worked at Netscape, a team lead for Netscape Navigator, or the product managers. And 25 years ago, I gave a speech saying how I thought the internet might actually train us to discriminate against each other in new ways. How I thought it might actually, as it evolved, divide us. And that was concerning, because those of us who are working in technology, those of us who stayed up obscene hours, we wanted to create this thing that made it possible for us to all have better information, to make better decisions.
It was going to democratize information.
And you can make better decisions on everything in life. And we would know people as individuals around the world because we connect with them on things like Zoom today and really get to know them. That was the dream of those of us working crazy. And in a lot of ways, the internet's done that. But when there's a lot of money or a lot of politics or a lot of power involved, it's doing the exact opposite. And so when we started All Sides and allsides.com 10 years ago, as I started creating technologies, what I was describing was the internet's broken. It's not doing what it was intended to do. And that's both scary, but also kind of good news, because that's technology. We can change that. The business models around it, we can change those. But whether they speak to our better angels inside of ourselves, or whether they pull out the worst of us, that's what we have to develop and focus upon.
And I think it's fascinating that All Sides actually uses humans in that. For those who don't, it's a site that sort of compares side by side the headlines and narratives on the left, the center, and the right. And I thought, oh, there must be some algorithms that's doing that. But you've got humans, which I find fabulously reassuring.
And I am a technologist, but I do think people get carried away with AI or algorithms, because all algorithms mean is that somebody you don't know behind a closed door decided what was important, and then they wrote the computer to decide that. So they are biased. They are biased by whoever wrote them. And we were very interested in coming up with a system that was not endangered by our own biases. All sides, we have people on the left and right and everything in between. We joke that we have never had food fights, although occasionally some more arguments get a little bit heated. But we consciously have people across the board, but that's not good enough. And journalists who really work hard to present news fairly, they're just doing it inside themselves. We all are biased. We all live in bubbles. We cannot rely just on ourselves to be fair or balanced or see the world evenly. So we created a system based on American people all across the nation to be able to take a look at different things, and we reflect what they would see. And we use that not so much to say, oh, you news media, you're left or you're right. We use it mainly as a way to enable all of us to quickly see different perspectives on the same issue, on the same news. Because the idea of technology, from my point of view, is to enable human beings to do what we do best. Think for ourselves, decide for ourselves, connect with other people. Technology is to serve that, not replace that.
So Joe, when you're talking to your conservative friends, in Berkeley where you live, people talk about planet and Earth, and others talk about markets and other jobs. So how are you careful about the language you use?
Absolutely. When I started Living Room Conversations, it was to be about climate and energy. And we rapidly learned we should just have an energy conversation, because people that don't believe in climate aren't coming to a climate and energy.
Yeah, but energy, you can get them in.
Yeah, and the people that care about climate, they'll hear about that in the process. Over time, I've come to believe that have a conversation about anything. It's that relationship and starting to soften these boundaries that we've been creating between each other that's most important. I mean, talking about the technology, there is a thing about algorithms that's really problematic, because with Facebook and all these different platforms, if it causes anger, fear, anxiety, it's more likely to get shared, and the algorithm is to get maximum profit, which is maximum sharing. So we have to become intentional about what we are taking in. That's why I love all sides, because that's a way of saying, actually, I want to see the full picture.
John, do you think that some of your liberal friends are too shrill and over worried about climate?
I think everybody's, in one issue or the other, there's always people who are too shrill or too worried on any issue. 75% of Americans would prefer news that's not slanted one way or the other. All right, 78%, my apologies, from Pew Research. And that's a big change from just 2 years before that, where it was in the 60s. We have 3.5% of the people of America being engaged in some kind of idea for a movement to succeed. If you're only talking about voters, that's like 5.5 million people, or a little over 10 million people. He's just talking about adults. That's a very achievable number. We're talking specifically about how to engage that number of people in ways that really solve problems. Because when you get the number of people engaged, culture changes, policy changes. And the fact that there are some people who may be more shrill or one way on the extremes on either side of the issue, I try not to be disrespectful about it, but to some extent, they don't really matter. The people who matter are the ones who are trying to solve the problem, who are truly listening to each other to solve the problem, to avoid the pitfalls of either extreme. And there's even a lot of evidence that suggests that doesn't suggest, but shows repeatedly that if you get a room full of just experts, and you get another room of experts and novices who don't know anything about the topic, and you give them the same problem, the room with a mixture of experts and novices will get the right answer right 90% more often than the pure experts. So we need to be challenged. And so if you really believe in the data, you got to commit to the processes that work to lead to better solutions, which includes open conversation with people who disagree with us, who aren't experts in the area, in order to get the better solution decided and acted upon. And that's our opportunity. And it's a very real thing. This is not just little kind of, oh, this is nice. Those are real numbers that we can achieve. And we're building technology not just in terms of sharing news, but how to have thousands and tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people to meet online in a video format using a living room conversations type guide so that they do what I like to describe as accidentally discovering the humanity of the other person.
So one of the things that's exciting, COVID caused us not to be here for a couple years, but we've got tens of millions of people that are really comfortable having conversations by Zoom now. We have a problem with local connection. You also have a problem with national trust and connection. It would be possible if people were ready to show up. We could do this at a massive level if people wanted to. Now, what makes this harder than what I did with Move On is you just signed a petition, you wrote a sentence about why you wanted to censure and move on. This requires showing up.
Well, relationships are harder. They take a lot of time, and they're kind of messy, and you get vulnerable. So,
but they're great.
And
they're
we have
wonderful.
a problem with loneliness in this country.
Yes,
and isolation and belonging. So it's the answer as well as the hard thing.
It's both the hard thing and what everybody in the nation and the world who are feeling alone are craving. We are wired to be tribal. We are wired to go against each other. We're also wired and needing connection. And connection across differences means that I can show you who I really am rather than what I'm supposed to be according to the TikTok videos or whatever that has to be, which really damages us psychologically. So yes, it takes more work, but it is really, as Joan points out, fun and much more fulfilling at a deeper level. That we as society need this. Even outside of climate change, we as a society need to learn how to connect and disagree in order to share who we really are and be more fulfilled as human beings and healthier.
Last year, a book was written called The Power of Strangers, just about all this data about how we're better off when we talk to strangers. We have fears about that, and we have to overcome them. But we're happier, we're healthier. It brings our day up. And so this is actually creating a context where we shift the story so that we're people that talk to strangers.
You know, John, in the political system, however, I hear that we're wired for this, we need this, and the business and political incentives are all going toward the extremes for the clicks and the primary wins. So what does that mean? We have to change culture first?
Well, we're seeing in a lot of hard data, a real rebellion against that. So Churchill's old quote was, America will always do the right thing after it's tried everything else. I think we've been trying everything else recently. And now we're going, that's not working. And there is a shift. There's over 5,000 organizations nationwide, according to something that Princeton did, that are focused on bridging divides. The demand for something other than the pundits yelling at each other is real. Even news organizations, such as CNN and many others, are now saying, you know what, maybe we were too extreme, maybe we need to change it so we actually hear the other side more. And they don't do that unless customers are going, hey, there's a problem here. All the data showing a big pushback against that. We do want something better. We did try something that didn't work that well. And a lot of us on all sides, on left and right, I don't mean, no pun intended, but on left and right, we're seeing that the problems aren't being solved. And when you're not heard long enough and your problems that matter the most aren't being addressed, we tend to get angry. We tend to elect more extreme people to solve the problem. When that doesn't work, we try something else. We're going to keep trying until we solve it. And so I think we're learning as a nation that the real extremes are not helping that much. There's a climate caucus in the House. Newt Gingrich is pushing Republicans in elected office to work on more solutions to climate issues. But when he and Van Jones, when they were doing Crossfire together, every time they agreed, the producers would come to him and say, stop doing that, it's bad for our ratings. And that's still true. Mm-hmm. But people are beginning to get tired of the what I call pro wrestling fights, you know, that they're just always making as much noise as possible to get news. And the fact that news in America has the lowest level of trust in any nation, well, top 45 nations in the world, according to Pew, there's less trust in America for our news system than any other nation.
And I'd say it's something even more than unhappy with the news. It's like it's causing people to turn it off because it makes them unhappy, it makes them anxious, it makes them fearful.
My wife can't stand watching it. She's disgusted. And I think I have another problem. I take in too much of it. So I've been trying to have a news diet lately because I realize it's kind of toxic for me. Like, do I really need that one more article about whatever it is? Like, is that to have an information budget, a diet, just like, that's enough.
I read a whole book about how it's bad for you to really limit your news intake. So, what does that say?
Listen to more podcasts. That's what I think.
Yes, this is upbeat. This is positive solutions.
And also to have a little bit of variety, because I think we get on this wheel of like inhaling information, and somehow I feel like the more I know, the better I am, or
Yeah.
I don't know.
So the question is, as we try and know more so we can persuade our friends, is have you actually persuaded someone that really disagrees with you? And that's one of the interesting things about the living room conversations. When we have a conversation that's about a polarized topic, you don't want to get a bunch of people that agree in the room because you come away feeling more extreme about that. Mm-hmm. You really want to be very intentional about differences in that room. And there are all sorts, depending on the conversation you're having, it can be age differences, it can be cultural differences, it can be political differences, gender differences, it all depends.
I'd like to bring this to a personal level. We've gone through a lot of, in the last couple of years in the American West, wildfires. We're in that are fast moving. We have droughts that are some ways fast, some ways slow. John, as someone who's from Kentucky, how have you personally experienced climate impacts in your own life in the last couple of years, and how have that?
It's interesting because obviously, we were talking before this show how in San Francisco there was this time when there were lots of fires and the smoke from the fires got caught underneath the fog layer of San Francisco, and the world turned sepia tone. This weird off-orange color.
It was a Mad Max day.
And you refer to Mad Max for real science fiction geeks like me. The second Outlander movie had this kind of thing, but it was, and I thought that movie wasn't realistic because it could never really look like that. It looked worse than that in walking outside. It was a bizarre world. How much is happening or what's happening or how quickly it's happening, what we can do about it, I don't know what the impact will be. There is a problem. We do know there's a problem. How big the problem is, what the right solutions are to the problem is really what I'm focused in.
Joan, how have you experienced climate disruption in your life personally?
Those fires were just stunning. And I was born locally, as I mentioned, so I'm not good with heat. I'm kind of a wilt. It's not, when we had 100 degrees and it was 6 p.m., I was going, this is not where I live. And there's a place in the Sierras that I have a really close connection to. There was a wind event over a year ago that took out all the amazing Jeffrey pines. There were 3 sentinel Jeffreys. The ones that were healthiest were blown down because they had full sails. And now I see them when I go there and they're on the ground. These are trees that are 700, 800 years old. I'm so grateful for the beautiful days we're having here right now and watching the fog. It hurts to see, the trees that are suffering, the droughts, I'm grateful when we have a rainy day because I'm hopeful that more of those trees are going to survive that are, I'm watching everything struggling. I probably get to the hills 5 days out of 7 in a week because that's the way I stay grounded and able to continue to work at what sometimes seems impossible.
Yeah.
But we can do this.
On Climate One today, we've been discussing Bridging the Great American Divide with Joan Blades, co-founder of Living Room Conversations, and John Gable, co-founder of allsides.com. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to John and Joan for joining us. Thank you all.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.